Zach, your overall thoughts on what the Eagles were able to accomplish, the fact that they get a home game next week too against a division rival. All of a sudden their road to the Super Bowl kind of seems to sets up in their favor.
Sure. I'm probably using the same expression as last week, survive in advance, because that's it. That's what happened. They survived that game. Now, you give credit to Saquon Barkley, who was outstanding again against the Rams. And you could say that basically for every game this season, but set an Eagles postseason franchise record for rushing yards with 205 yards. Nick Sirianni said after the game, championship defense. And that's what they were. They came through with critical plays throughout the game. On the final two plays for the Rams, when they had a chance to go ahead, you saw Jalen Carter get a sack and get a pressure. Jalen Carter's continuing to develop into like the next great Eagles defensive player. They had two forced fumbles earlier in the second half when momentum was starting to shift. So you look at that. This is the way the Eagles have played this year. Is they're dominant on the ground. Their defense was number one in the league for a reason this year, and now they have a home game with a chance to go to the Super Bowl. This is a situation that I don't think the Eagles anticipated when this started.
It really was watching the Rams play as much as I have this season. Obviously, 2 games against the Cardinals. I went to the playoff game last Monday, which was just, I mean, it's crazy to think that was a week ago today, and the Rams already had another game under their belt. But it's an encapsulation of how their season went. I mean, this team was like 1-4. They were dead and buried, and they make their way to winning the NFC West. And you thought it so many times that they were going to get knocked out. The knockout punch or blow was delivered, many times from the Eagles, and they came back. What can you say about like the resiliency that you witnessed between Matthew Stafford, Sean McVay in that game?
Yeah, it's a great point, Bo, because I frankly thought when Jake Elliott misses the extra point, okay, so I was like, oh, this, because here, I'll back up. Saquon
Sure.
has that 78-yard touchdown, and I'm like, that's game. Saquon called game. Then Jake Elliott misses the extra point, and I was like, I don't think this will matter that much, but there's still time. The Rams had their best drive of the game going downfield, and I also have to point out the Rams are playing in cold weather in the snow. That's unfamiliar for the Rams, right? But they have that great drive there in the fourth quarter, make it a one possession game. The Eagles, who've been so good at 4-minute offense this year, go 3 and out, give the Rams the ball back. And I'll be honest, I thought at that point the Rams were going to go downfield. And I thought that missed extra point was going to be looming. So I give so much credit to the Rams for making that a close game when after Saquon's run with 4.5 minutes on the clock or so, I thought that was it. I thought the conditions, I thought the Eagles defense, I thought that was going to be too much. So for the Rams to make that as close as they did, credit to them. But ultimately, I could say the same thing about Saturday night's game in that turnovers are such a determining factor. And the Rams had 2 bad turnovers in the second half, and obviously the Stoke contributed to it. But the turnover differential was the key here, as it was on Saturday night, as it was against the Packers when the Eagles beat them last week.
One of the things I love about the NFL is these monumental moments in the offseason sometimes show up to matter so much in January. And I just like this entire season have not been able to get the Hard Knocks moment out of my head when John Mara is in Joe Shane's office, like as trying not to meddle, it seems like, as much as he can, but also being really clear about the fact that if they let Saquon Barkley go, it's going to be tough to swallow. And now here we are, and the Eagles are 1 game away from the Super Bowl. And I don't know, honestly, Zach, where this Eagles team would be without Saquon Barkley, because he has just been so good for them. I mean, they have a good enough roster that I think they would have been competitive this year anyway, right? But that really seems to be like it could be, if the Eagles go on to win the Super Bowl, like that's the biggest reason why, in my opinion.
Sure, it's been a magical season for Saquon. There's no other way to put it. I mean, this surpassed anyone's expectations. 2,000 yards, a 205-yard game in the playoffs. The amount of big runs that he's had, these home runs that he had. I mean, he had a 78-yarder yesterday. He had a 60-yarder. It's incredible to watch. And the Giants let him out the door. Now, I would say, look, I'm not defending the Giants here. I don't know if he would have. I'm similar to Derrick Henry. I think a great running back can make a good team great, or a great team even better. I don't think it makes a bad team great, right? So I don't think the Giants are in the playoffs if Saquon's there. I think the Giants made their bed a year earlier when they decided to kind of commit to Daniel Jones as opposed to Saquon, right? And not address the quarterback situation. But yeah, the way that Saquon Barkley's changed the Eagles' offense, it's legitimate. It cannot be overstated. And you even go back and like I know this will be painful to Bears fans, but when the Eagles were able to get Jalen Carter the year before, had to be a difference maker on defense. And I think for all the you look at all these decisions the Eagles have made, the bottom line is they're the more talented team in most of these games they play. And they've gambled on talent. They've brought in players who other teams have found whether it's too expensive or there's risk here. And the Eagles have made it work. And across this roster, there's so much talent. That's why they're here, and that's frankly why they've been in the championship game 6 times now since 2000. That's not by accident.
And real quick on that, sorry, Bo, just like I was thinking about that during the game. First of all, Jalen Carter is just so fun to watch, and I mean, he might be the best. He might end up being, by this time next year, we might be talking about him as like the best defensive lineman in the entire league. Honestly, the trajectory he's on. And I was thinking about that during the game, like kind of what you just said, Zach. Like good teams gamble on talent, and I feel like bad organizations find reasons to make excuses to not gamble, right? Like, I mean, you had the Jalen Carter thing. You had, and look, the Bears got a solid right tackle out of that in Darnell Wright, but we're talking about an All-Pro type player already in Jalen Carter, and the conversation at that time was, do you have the infrastructure? Do you have the culture to be able to take on somebody with character issues? And, I think the one thing we've learned a couple things about that situation was, one, obviously the Eagles are a better organization to be able to handle that. But also, two, it seems like those character issues were, I don't want to say overblown because they were very serious at the time. But I think also props to whether you're giving the Eagles credit or Jalen Carter credit or both. I mean, unless I'm missing something, you're there every day, Zach. I mean, he doesn't seem to be causing any problems whatsoever. It just seems like a pretty professional football player already.
Yeah, and he's made jumps from year to 1 to year 2. And look, there was an incident earlier this year where he was late for a meeting, right? The Eagles wanted him to be in better shape going into year 2. But by and large, and Nick Sirianni said this yesterday, it's not just talent. Like everyone looks at Jalen Carter and says he's talented. Jalen Carter played 69 of 71 snaps yesterday. His 2 best snaps came on the last 2 snaps of the game. This is someone who, when Clint Hurt, the defensive line coach, came here during the offseason, the first thing he said is you have to be in better condition to take on more snaps this year. And Jalen Carter's done everything that they've asked. So you have to look at these character questions in the draft and say, is this something that's going to improve over time? Yeah. Do you have the infrastructure? Do you have the leadership in place? But you also have to understand that you're dealing with 21, 22-year-olds. What are they going to be as they improve? And I can say this, like, I'm not confessing or I guess professing to say that I'm involved in every detail there and know every detail there. But one thing I can say is that, to a man, I've spoken to multiple players about this, people behind the scenes, Jalen Carter loves playing football. And when you start with that, when you start with like the foundation that this guy wants to be great, then you can usually improve everything else around him.
It was such a strange moment, Hogue. I think we were together at the Combine when the warrant was issued for Jalen Carter.
Yeah.
He missed his interview. I think he was coming back and doing interviews with teams. He wasn't working out. And like, it is an absolute credit to Philly in the cultures you guys had kind of outlined here, and obviously the infrastructure, to where like 2 dysfunctional organizations like the Cardinals, who also passed on him, traded back up into the top 10, took Paris Johnson Jr., and it had Carter there. They could have selected him. They just didn't have the luxury of taking a guy with red flags. And I mean, now it just looks like a miss, but add context to it, like credit to Howie Roseman and the Eagles for being in that position to be able to take that risk on a tremendously talented player. Like, no doubt about it, consensus best talent on the defensive side in that draft.
But isn't it funny, guys, when you just even in the Saquon Barkley case, which is different because that's, he's obviously a definition of a pro with, no character concerns whatsoever. When the Eagles get him, it's just more so the running back market. Like, the conversation was, is it worth paying that much money for a running back? But it's like, as soon as a team like the Eagles does it, you're like, oh, that's probably going to work. Like, I remember on draft night when the Bears made that trade and the Eagles took Jalen Carter, like, oh, he's going to be a stud there. Right. And same thing, I remember free agency last year. It's like, oh, Saquon went to the Eagles. Well, it's just like good organizations just – they take advantage of these other teams that are afraid to. The Chiefs have done it a million times during their run here. Oh, nobody wants this guy. We'll take him. Sure, we'll take a flyer on him. He'll be great here. It's just funny.
Yeah, it used to be the Patriots, right? With Belichick, it was like some guy would be cast off, and they think everybody's going to turn into Randy Moss once again, and like it would. We forget about the times it doesn't hit, but so many times you're watching them play big games in January, and you're like, it just made so much sense.
Yeah, I've spoken to Howie Roseman about this. I've spoken to Jeffrey Lurie about this, about not being afraid of taking risks. And look, they don't all work out. And when they don't work out, one thing you have to do is you have to move on quickly and kind of be honest with where your roster is. But I give the Eagles credit with doing that, with gambling on talent. And the infrastructure is important, but ultimately, I mean, talent wins out, and I'll usually take the talented, tough teams over the teams that are afraid to make decisions. And I've always thought that whether it's draft or free agency, if you find yourself trying to talk yourself out of a player, it's usually a sign it's a good player. If you have to convince yourself, like, oh, this might be a good pick, that's where you have to be concerned, And I think where the Eagles have made mistakes in the draft, frankly, is when they've had to try to talk themselves into somebody, as opposed to when the rest of the league's trying to talk themselves out of somebody.
Zach, let me ask you this. Like with Josh Allen, he passes for 127 yards, finds the end zone with his legs, and people are like, that's a hero. When Jalen Hurts passes for 120 yards and rushes for a big touchdown, people are calling HR on him. Like, what's the level of concern now with the Eagles quarterback, just under 260 yards passing through 2 playoff games?
Yeah, Nick Sirianni will appreciate your point. Now, to be fair, Jalen didn't look good yesterday, especially after the injury. He injured his knee, came back in, and he couldn't move well. And when the pressure was coming, he couldn't get out of the way. You saw that on the safety. You saw that on the second down sack on the Eagles' last drive. And so I think Jalen could have played better. But I also look at it, Jalen didn't turn the ball over yesterday, right? That's one thing Nick points to, the efficiency. Jalen Hurts is in the NFC Championship game for the second time in 3 years. Going back to when Jalen was in college, Jalen Hurts has never missed the playoffs in a year that he started. Like college football playoffs at Alabama, college football playoffs at Oklahoma. Becomes the starter with the Eagles in 2021. They make the playoffs. 2022, they make the Super Bowl. 2023, they make the playoffs. 2024, they're in the NFC Championship game. And I get it. Like Jalen needs to play better at times. There's no secret there. He's missing on throws. When he was injured, he couldn't move as well. But there is something to the fact that he's in the winner's circle often. And that's what Nick Sirianni points to. And I don't know if wins and losses is a quarterback stat. I think that can be a stretch. But I think your team wins and loses often because of the way your quarterback plays, because of the decisions that he makes one way or the other. And Jalen Hurts has what, 1 interception since the bye week. He's not making losing plays. He's not making enough winning plays. He did have that 40-plus yard rush yesterday on the opening drive, longest run of the game, but he's not making losing plays. He's playing within the offense at times. And I will also say this: when the Eagles badly needed a drive yesterday after the Rams scored, he brought them downfield and was able to put them in a good spot. So, yeah, I mean, look, Josh Allen's going to be the MVP this year, or Lamar Jackson's going to be the MVP this year. But Josh Allen's been playing better. I would say I can't defend Jalen there, but I do think it's not a coincidence that Jalen's teams often win.
Zach, I know it's only Monday, but what is your level of concern about that knee? I didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that Jalen finished the game. I didn't necessarily love his answer, in his post game interview. It didn't breed confidence, but I mean, it's. I guess if I had to guess right now, it seems like something he'll play through, but maybe won't be 100%. So, what's your level of concern?
Yeah, I'm expecting him to play through it. He said as much. Now Jalen after the game says he'll have to see how this week goes, and my antenna goes up, and I ask Jalen, I say, hey, I just want to clarify. Does that mean your status is in question? And he said that's a great question. We have to see kind of how this week goes, but he's confident he will play, and I'm expecting Jalen to play. I don't know if he'll be 100%, and I think that when you look at he left that first Washington game with the concussion. I'm sorry, the second Washington game with the concussion. And look, he clearly wants to be out there. I think he will push through it. But if he can't move well, then that certainly affects the Eagles' offense. It affects what Jalen's able to do. So I think that's going to turn into being the major storyline this week.
And it's round 3 between Washington and Philadelphia, and they split. Washington hasn't lost a game since November. People obviously odds are going to be in the favor of Philadelphia here, but I'm sure the team's going to be saying all the right things when they start to build up to this division rival showdown here in the conference championship game.
Yeah, look, I've seen both teams now play against each other twice. I think the Eagles are the more talented team. I think the Eagles are the better team. The Eagles are at home. There's a lot of factors going in the Eagles' favor. That said, Jaden Daniels is hot right now, and Washington, what their mantra is anywhere, anybody, anywhere, anytime. They went up to Detroit and won that game, and I thought Detroit was the best team in the NFC, and they didn't just win. I mean, they were outstanding in that game. And the Eagles are dealing with a quarterback injury here, so circumstances matter. I'm expecting the Eagles to win the game because I think the Eagles are the better team, and they're at home. The Eagles are favored for a reason. But man, I'm so impressed with what Washington did. The one thing I'll say is I don't think Washington has quite the pass rush that it's going to take in this game. And you saw the Rams were able to get to the quarterback. The Commanders don't have the same type of pass rush that the Rams do. So I'm leaning toward the Eagles here, but quarterbacks are the biggest difference. And what Jaden Daniels is doing right now is hard to argue.
Yeah, 100%. Should be a fun one. I mean, the Commanders are a hell of a story. We're going to talk a little bit more about them here. Their win over the Lions. I'll say this though: if you've been following our work at ALLCITY and in any of our networks, we go all out for the Super Bowl. We're going to be there in a couple of weeks, and it would be a lot of fun if the Eagles get in there and are playing in that game. As much as it'll probably add a lot more work to your plate, Zach. Selfishly,
Yeah.
I'd be okay with that result. You've covered Super Bowls with the Eagles, without the Eagles, but one game away, man.
Yeah, this is my 13th year on the beat. This would be the third Super Bowl that the Eagles would be in during that period. So it's much different when you're covering the team you're covering it as opposed to the Super Bowl at large. But it's also what makes it fun because everyone there is trying to learn the team, and you're the expert on the team. So we'll see what happens. I don't think Sunday's gonna be a gimme. I think Sunday's gonna be a difficult one. We'll see what happens with Jaden Daniels.
Let me sneak one more in there because Kellen Moore obviously picking up some traction as a head coaching candidate. They've gone through this. Last time they were in the Super Bowl, they had both their top coordinators take head coaching jobs. Is there any concern as they go through this once again?
Yeah, I mean, I think beyond this season, sure, because Jalen Hurts has had now 4 coordinators in 4 years, right?
Wow.
So if well, it would be the 4th coordinator in 4 years next year, I should say, if Kellen Moore leaves. He had Shane Steichen for 2 years as his OC. Then he had Brian Johnson. He has Kellen Moore this year. So if Kellen Moore leaves, and you have to think back to when Jalen Hurts was in college, he had a different offensive coordinator every single year of college. The only time he's had the same coordinator back-to-back years was Shane Steichen going from 21 to 22. So yeah, this is something that the Eagles must monitor. Now, as the organization said in the past, and as Nick Sirianni said last week, this is part of winning, right? When the Eagles, when they won the Super Bowl in 2017, Frank Reich leaves for a head coaching job. If you have success, you're going to lose coaches. It's the reality of it. Now, I think the Eagles feel good about Vic Fangio staying. That's part of why he's here. He provides that continuity. But I would think, and I'll defer to our colleagues at DLLS, but I would think Kellen Moore, from what I've heard, is a top candidate down there.
Yeah, and they might have the patience to wait on him through the Super Bowl. Unlike some of these other teams that are chasing Ben Johnson right now, which we need to talk about that right now too, because the Lions. I think we all thought the Lions were going to be that team that were going to be delaying these coaching searches, and now all of a sudden, in fact, just as we're sitting here, reports coming out that Aaron Glenn is already set up to visit both the Saints and the Jets for second in-person interviews. So both those teams looking at Aaron Glenn as well. So we'll see how it plays out with Kellen Moore and the Eagles. Zach, thanks so much. We'll continue to be following you at ZBerm. All the great work, PHLY. And yeah, it'll be a busy week. We'll be watching as you guys get ready for the NFC Championship.
We all silly like the mayor.